Among Japan's many old folk tales, there is one called Ubasuteyama, which describes the abandonment of the elderly in the mountains. In medieval Japan, village customs dictated that a son must take his parents deep into the mountains and leave them there to die when they reached the age of 60. As parents approached the age of 60, they prepared themselves spiritually and announced that it was time to go to the mountain. It was a sad ceremony. But not all abandoned parents were spiritually prepared for the ordeal, and not all sons had the resolve to lead their parents away. Conflicting feelings of love and hate created a complex web of emotion between parent and child. There was not enough food to support the village people. Such tales of abandonment testify to the poverty and sorrow of people who lived in those times.
Let's look at the composition of Japan's population today and focus on some concrete facts concerning Japan's elderly. In 1988, Japan's total population was 122 million, comprised of about 60 million men and about 62 million women. According to the definition established by the United Nations, the term elderly population refers to people aged 65 or over. A society is considered geriatric when the elderly population exceeds 7% of the total population. Japan's current ratio of elderly people to the total population is 11.9%. Under the social welfare system, elderly people's income is primarily derived from the income of working people aged 15 to 64. The number of working people in relation to the number of elderly people is expressed in terms of a dependency ratio for the elderly. In 1988, this ratio was 6.6, meaning that nearly 7 working people provided the base of support for one elderly person. This ratio is expected to decline to 4.0 people by the year 2000 and to 2.6 people by the year 2025. In other words, before we get through the first quarter of the 21st century, there will only be about 3 working people supporting one elderly person. This graph compares the number of years it has taken the elderly population ratio to climb from 7% to 14% in other industrialized countries. France has taken 130 years, and Sweden 85 years. In contrast, Japan is expected to reach the 14% level in a mere 25 years.
Why have the aging patterns of Japan's population developed this way? Let's examine some of the underlying causes and trends. One main cause is Japan's declining birth rate, which peaked just after World War II, and it has been in steady decline since 1950, when post-war order was restored. In 1955, parents had an average of about 2.4 children. By 1988, however, this number had declined to just 1.7. One reason for the reduced birth rate was the widespread acceptance of the New Life movement, which included the introduction of family planning, health programs, and hygiene education. These changes were felt throughout the country, down to the remotest village. In addition, information on contraceptive techniques was disseminated, and birth control gained wider acceptance. Another factor was the implementation of the Eugenic Protection Act in 1948, which legalized induced abortion. A new value system emerged that was typified by the saying, "Have fewer children and raise them wisely." The combination of these various factors resulted in a lower birth rate. A second cause of Japan's aging population is a reduced death rate, as shown in this graph. One of the reasons for the decline is the widespread improvement in public hygiene, which was achieved through academic and social education. These education programs helped create a healthier environment. In addition, antibiotics and other powerful medical drugs came into general use, and advances were made in medical treatment techniques. Infant mortality is a good example of the improvements that have been achieved. In 1955, 39.8 out of every 1,000 live births died before the age of 1. By 1988, this number had been reduced to less than 1/8, or just 4.6 out of every 1,000 live births. But this improvement is not limited to infants. With the help of improved diets and better medical treatment, the health of adults has also improved. Another factor contributing to longer life is Japan's comprehensive medical insurance system. Established as part of national government policy, the system provides medical benefits to all Japanese citizens. The general rise in income levels, which has given the Japanese a high degree of material comfort in recent years, is yet another factor. Since about 1955, Japan's modern economic infrastructure was in place, setting the stage for the period of high economic growth that began about 1960. Japan's GNP has grown to be second only to the United States among the countries of the free world. With this growth, the personal income of the Japanese has increased dramatically. During this high economic growth, the number of people seeking higher education has increased, resulting in the diversification of personal value systems. This ongoing process has created a free society unhampered by the conventions of the past. As a result of lower birth and death rates, the Japanese now have the highest average life expectancy in the world.
Several social problems have emerged, however. Let's consider what some of these are. The first problem is how the elderly are to be supported. It is an unfortunate fact that those who live solely on pensions after retirement cannot maintain the same standard of living they enjoyed while they worked. If we look at how much money the government provides in pensions from year to year, we see that it has grown to a huge amount. From the recipient's point of view, however, the amount is insufficient. And for those who are still vigorous after 65 and who want to continue working, the opportunities for re-employment after retirement are extremely limited. Although public demands have been made for some 10 years to raise the mandatory retirement age, only a little over half of all Japanese companies have raised their retirement age to 60. The people who are approaching retirement age now are the so-called corporate warriors, who supported Japan's tremendous economic growth. For these people, retirement leaves no place to go, and they are reduced to spending their days on park benches or in the amusement corners of department stores. The second problem confronting the aging society is illness. For every 1,000 people aged 65 to 74, an average of 616 suffer from some kind of illness. For people over 74, the number goes up to 692. The ratios of people who are bedridden or in dementia are still comparatively low. But for households with people in these conditions, the problem is serious. Proper care cannot be provided by family members alone. To deal with this problem, the government has established special nursing homes for people 65 and over who suffer from physical or mental disorders that cannot be treated at home. There are also private nursing homes that take care of the elderly for a fee. However, these facilities alone are not enough. For example, only 3.6 out of every 1,000 people aged 65 to 74 are accepted in the government's special nursing homes. This number rises to 19.2 out of 1,000 for people over 74, but it is still very small. At present, 800 people are waiting to be admitted into this special nursing home in Tokyo. The waiting period is said to be 2 years. Government expenditure for the medical care of the elderly has also grown considerably. Expenditure for the year 1986 was about 4.5 trillion yen, or about 523,000 yen for every elderly person. If this trend continues, elderly patients will fill hospitals to overflowing, and the government's medical insurance system will go bankrupt. The third problem is one of personal fulfillment. Most of the people who are now 65 or over grew up in the lively environment of families where 3 generations lived under the same roof. But starting around 1955, nuclear families increased, resulting in today's average household of just 3.22 people. As you can see from this graph, 87.4% of all elderly people lived with their children in 1960. At present, only 65.5% do so. If we examine living patterns in more detail, we see that of all households with members 65 and over, 20.6% are comprised of elderly couples who live by themselves, and 9.2% are comprised of one elderly person living alone. The number of people spending their old age in silence and loneliness has increased dramatically. Also, for a variety of reasons, the number of older people committing suicide has continued to rise from year to year. In the brief span of 40 years, Japan has achieved tremendous economic growth, but this growth has been accompanied by several problems. Although these problems are political and economic and have a direct effect on private households, Japan is by no means turning its back on these difficulties. Serious efforts are being made to address each of the problems facing us, and many experiments are being tried to find viable solutions.
In the final section of this presentation, let's look at how Japan is trying to solve the problems associated with the rapid aging of its population. Approaches are being made on national, industrial, social, and personal levels. The first approach is to establish a social security system that will meet the needs of an aging society. All of us will eventually grow old. For this reason, it is necessary to establish a general consensus that the support of the elderly is a national responsibility. Once this consensus is achieved, it seems reasonable to expect that pension plans and health insurance programs can be expanded to meet the growing requirements of the elderly. The point is not just to improve programs for the elderly, but to create a welfare society that will provide overall solutions for all generations. Based on this approach, yearly public expenditure for programs related to social security now account for 20.15% of the total budget, or roughly 3 times the amount spent on national defence. This graph shows how government expenditures within the social security budget for medical insurance and pensions have changed as percentages of Japan's national income since 1965. Expenditure for medical benefits for the elderly increased about 1.7 times, and expenditure for pensions increased 5.5 times. Converting these percentages into actual monetary amounts, expenditure for medical insurance amounted to 9.7 billion yen in 1986, or 11 times the amount spent in 1965. Expenditure for pensions has grown even more dramatically, with 1986 levels equaling 16.4 billion yen, or 83 times the amount spent in 1965. Japan's efforts to accommodate the rising demand for elderly support are evident in these figures. The standard of Japan's current national health care and pension programs is comparable to that of similar programs in other advanced and industrial nations. A second approach is to create a comfortable social environment for the elderly. Nursing homes should not be built in remote places, but ideally in towns and cities where occupants can take part in the daily activity of their local communities. As part of this approach, more and more welfare activities for those who are bedridden or who live alone are being carried out by local residents. In many areas, for example, an experimental program called Home Welfare Service has been implemented, in which local residents care for the elderly who live near them. In many local communities, social education and welfare programs are helping to foster a sense of community involvement that taps the knowledge and skills of the elderly.
The third approach is to increase job opportunities for older people who wish to work. In the private sector, companies are working to increase employment opportunities for the elderly. Policies such as further extension of the retirement age, shortening of work hours, on-the-job training in new technologies, as well as re-employment of senior citizens after retirement, are some examples of this approach. In the public sector as well, new jobs that utilize the special abilities, knowledge, and experience of the elderly are being created systematically. The fourth approach is to help the elderly to help themselves in leading a rich and fulfilling life after retirement. A new trend has emerged that emphasizes mental fulfillment as well as material prosperity. More and more people today are finding ways to participate in society after they have retired. People who concentrate on hobbies or who derive satisfaction through travel or sports, or again, people who contribute their knowledge and skills to their community through volunteer work. Indeed, Japan has chosen the path of wholeheartedly embracing all of the rich human resources that the elderly have to offer. Every year on September 15th, the Japanese celebrate a holiday called Respect for the Aged Day. It is an important holiday in which people pause to praise the wisdom of the elderly and to celebrate their continued good health.
At the beginning of this presentation, we introduced the folktale Ubasteyama. Now we'll tell you how the story ends. Although the son dutifully takes his mother to the mountain, he cannot bring himself to leave her there. Instead, he brings her back to the village and secretly takes care of her. One day, the lord of the land gives the son a problem to test his wisdom. With the help of his mother, the son solves it and wins great praise from the lord for his cleverness. When the lord discovers that it was actually the mother who solved the problem, he praises her wisdom and forgives the son for breaking the village custom of abandonment. From that time onwards, the custom is outlawed, and so the story ends.
The 21st century will soon be here. What can be done to fully use the wisdom of our elderly and to create a society in which all of us can lead rewarding lives? Although many difficult problems must be solved, Japan is working to achieve this goal through improved social welfare programs, enrichment of our social infrastructure, and other new ideas.